Hey guys, so I just purchased a Fuji X-T2, and one of the things that I originally left the Fuji X series for was worms. If you haven't heard about this issue, it's basically, they call it worms because of how Adobe Lightroom reads the RAW files that the Fuji X cameras make. They use a slightly different pixel array on the sensors of the camera. And apparently Adobe Lightroom hasn't been optimized for those kinds of images. And so what you get is some weird kind of effects here where you're not getting the optimal image quality using Adobe Lightroom versus some other RAW interpreter software. So a lot of people have suggested alternatives for this. One is called Iridian Developer. And what that basically allows you to do is interpolate the raw data and then use that image either straight out of that interpretation, or you can spit that back into Lightroom post-processed. That doesn't really work for me. I'm not really set up for that kind of workflow, and one of the reasons that I purchased a Fuji X camera in the first place was so I could do less post-processing. And so I wanted to see how this new software called Luminar would do versus Adobe Lightroom. But first, let's just take a look at the Lightroom, the way Lightroom interprets this image right upon import. This is the default sharpening settings that I have set up in Adobe Lightroom. And you can see right off the bat here that there is a lot of worms. I'm just going to call them worms. I don't really know what else to call it. It kind of looks like a watercolor painting, especially in here where you're just losing out on a lot of detail that's definitely there. And you'll see that when we pop this into Luminar. The detail is there, but the way that Lightroom is interpreting the data, you kind of lose any of the nice quality of that. So this is with a very, very small amount of sharpening added to Adobe Lightroom. I can easily push. I have a Nikon D5300. It's a 3 or 5 year old camera at this point, but it's a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. So it's a very comparable sensor, and I can easily push that up to into the 90s. That's kind of my default import preset, and with a radius of like 1.1, 1.0. And you can see the image here just looks terrible. I mean, this is zoomed in at 100%, but even out here, we can just see all that detail is just getting kind of eaten alive in here. So that is not going to be a great solution for me. So Luminar is a software made by Macphun. I hadn't really heard about this until I was exploring purchasing the Fuji cameras, and I had seen some promising results from that. So let's take a look and see what we can get. And I've already kind of been messing around with this here, but currently this is just upon import. This is how, once it loads, that Luminar is interpreting it. And it doesn't do, there's no sharpening on this image right now, but we can see that although there's no sharpening here, you're not getting that weird watercolor effect or the worms here. Let's take a look and just flip back to Lightroom really quickly. Can hide this here. You're getting that watercolor effect as well as the kind of the worms up here. No watercolor and no worms, though it is, you're definitely missing out on that sharpening. Okay, so let's see how Luminar is going to be handling the sharpening versus Lightroom. So if we come in here, let's go ahead and just throw a quick 50% sharpen on the image here. And we can already see that it looks pretty good. It's looking a lot better in here. You're not getting any strange watercolor effect like you do in Lightroom. You can see there's almost no detail in here, especially anywhere you get any kind of highlights. There's really not any detail there. We go into Luminar here, and there's still detail. There's definitely detail in this, and we're zoomed in. I know that it's saying 300% here, but this is about 100%. That's something I've actually asked the developers of Luminar why it's not showing 300%, because this is a 24 megapixel image, and this is definitely not 100%. So I'm going to find out about that, but this is about pixel to pixel as far as I can tell compared to Lightroom, where it's definitely 1:1. So there's still things that I need to figure out about this software, but so far the sharpening with the Fuji X files does look promising. So that's with a 50% sharpen, or a sharpening of 50. And one of the cool things and one of my favorite things about Luminar so far is these two buttons here. This one is kind of a toggle to see the untouched image and then all the edits you've made. You just hold it back, kind of like Instagram. When you're posting on Instagram, you can kind of tap to see the original image, and then you let go to see the retouched image. And one of the other cool things is this before and after. Obviously, you can do this using Compare using Lightroom, but it's kind of finicky to set up. This is really simple. You just click it on, drag it over, click it off. I find it much more useful. And we can see that that is a huge improvement, and it's clearly getting much more out of the sensor than you do in Adobe Lightroom, where, again, this is just with a 25, a sharpening of 25 here. And it's not like Lightroom does any better when you use clarity. It actually makes it worse in my opinion. And some people have suggested that you can use the detail slider. And I found that that does, in a combination with the detail and sharpening, you can get something a little bit better, but again, you're losing out on all this. That looks really bad to my eyes. And this would show up in print. Like, you would definitely see that in print. You're not going to see it tiny, but it's not pretty. It doesn't look good. And for photographers who are spending, thousands of dollars to get sharp images, I think that's the least we can expect. So I'm pretty happy with this. I think we could probably tone it down just a little bit, bring it down to say 40. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, and for 40%, I think that's pretty good. So that's a quick look at how Luminar handles Fuji X files versus Lightroom. And I plan to do a lot more testing. I live in Portland, Oregon, and right now it is definitely the rainy season, so I haven't been able to get outside, but this was a clear day where I was able to shoot a scene where I knew we'd get some of that artifacting, but I plan to do a lot more tests on that. So if this was helpful for you, definitely check out Luminar 2018. It's a promising program. One thing that they don't have that Lightroom has, probably better than anybody right now, except for Capture One. I wasn't super interested in Capture One, mostly because of the cost. Luminar is something like $70 versus Capture One, which is several $100s or $20 a month, which is twice as expensive as Lightroom if you pay month to month. They don't have the digital asset management or DAM. That is coming. It's going to be a free update to Luminar 2018 later on, and I honestly can't wait for that because for a number of reasons I'd like to move away from Adobe Lightroom. But that's a quick look at how Luminar handles Fuji RAW files versus Adobe Lightroom. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of videos like this, give me a subscribe. Thanks.